Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Anderson Cook, coordinator for Read SC, the South Carolina Center for the Book. On behalf of the Georgia Center for the Book and Read SC, I'm excited to welcome you to our final installment in the current On My Mind series featuring Gullah-Geechee authors. On My Mind was developed by the Georgia Center for the Book and Read SC to highlight books, authors, and topics we share along our border. Before we begin this evening, I'd like to remind you that we encourage you to ask questions. There is a Q&A button at the top or bottom of your device, depending on which one you have, where you can submit as many questions as you would like. We'll keep track of them and ask them at the end of the talk. We also have a chat feature where we have books, links for the purchase of the books that we have by our featured poets this evening. Whenever possible, we encourage you to shop independent bookstores wherever you are. Lastly, we do have closed captions available. You can access them with the CC button at the top or bottom of your device, and you do have the option to increase or decrease the font size as needed. Now, on to our two speakers this evening. Marlanda Dekine is a poet obsessed with ancestry, memory, and the process of staying within one's own body. Their collection of poems, Thresh Hold, won the 2021 New Southern Voices Poetry Prize at Hub City Press. Their work has been published in Rootwork Journal, Oxford American, Poetry Magazine, Southern Humanities Review, and many more. They currently serve as a Healing Justice Fellow with Gender Benders, a transgender advocacy group in the South, and performs Ars Poetica with the composer-performer collective Counter Induction. Malika Imhotep is a Black feminist writer and performance artist from Atlanta, Georgia, currently completing a PhD in African Diaspora Studies and New Media Studies at the University of California, Berkeley. As a scholar and cultural worker, Ra is invested in exploring relationships between queer Black identities, Black vernacular cultures, and the performance of labor. Their writing has been published in Arrow, the New Life Quarterly, Burnaway, Scalloway Magazine, Women in Performance, The Breakbeat Poets, Volume 2, Black Girl Magic, and Stellium Literary Magazine. Ra is co-author of the Black Feminist Study Theory Atlas, and their debut poetry collection, Gossipin', was published by Red Hen Press last month. I am so excited to hear you both in conversation tonight and to hear the poetry that you'll be reading for us, and I would love to hand it off to you both now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction, Anderson. Hello, Ra.
Hi.
Do you want me to go first?
I would like that, yes.
Okay, we're gonna read poems and let the poems be in conversation. So we're gonna take turns reading for a little bit. The first poem I'm gonna read from my collection, well, you can't see it because I have the background, but this is the book. It's called Thresh Hold. Thank you. And it's published by Hub City Press. The first poem I'm going to read for you all tonight is The Black River. The Black River, whispered dreams, Spanish moss reached. When we moved back to where my parents grew up, I was eating more rice than I knew existed, and I did not want to be up and down. The village is known as Jackson Village Road. I didn't understand, speaking to me and telling me which of our dead. I had God, I have never prayed, home, 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 home. Why people were stories. I resembled so many cousins and so many questions for as much as I wonder, home, home, home. I didn't understand home, why people were speaking to me in home, stories telling me home, which of our dead, home. I resembled home, so many cousins I had, home, and so many questions for God. I have never prayed, home, as much as I, home, home, wonder, home, home, home.
Home is a mouthful of spit for your tender heart. 1. The humidity moves into my skin and breaks up all my English. The words start dripping from one to the next. Seem like my tongue get fatter when I'm back home. Won't move around fast enough, can't pick up the right syllable. Just lounge around my mouth, pulling up too thick saliva. I spit out the side my face like all the niggas I used to watch pose around the corner store, and all the niggas that came before them, who shot craps against that same wall, talking shit like it's syrup. A young Black thing pretty like me walk by, and that spit turn to steam, creep up the back of thighs that wouldn't normally be exposed this time of year. But this a Georgia winter. And when my mama first moved down here, Sagittarius as she is, they barbecued on her birthday. All that New York just melted away, and her English start to break too. Soon she start to moving like them Augusta women her folks ran north to get away from. 2. In the kitchen, we laughed through a joke about how I'm sounding like I'm back on somebody's plantation. And she let on that she noticed, but say that whenever I do decide to speak English, I speak it good. So good she turned to dictionary, trying to follow where I'm going. Say I be using them words in new ways with new folks' rules. Then come home and melt all them semantics into something slow and sloppy. And in my voice, I remember stories that ain't all the way mine. 3. How everything I know about sound and poem come from up out red clay and get stuck underneath my tongue. How we wash the headstones white with our mouths full of laughter, and ain't that how we mourn? How my daddy's sister used to keep dolls on her bed just like I do, and ain't that how you put beauty to rest? How they used to fill cuts with cobwebs, and ain't that where all the wisdom come from? How spit is good enough medicine for anything on the surface, and ain't that why it pull up at healing time?
First Lady of the Church. I don't want to remember how she made the reverend run, praying scriptures like spells while sitting next to Peace Louise. So many times I was afraid of her searching for camphor, her tales of the Plat Eye and hags, burning pine needles, all while laughing at the audacity of wayward men. Grandma Thelma turned trees into so many things. She'd disappear into grapevines unbothered by snakes, return with her brown hands purple and wet. She mashed muscadines into wine like her 8 children, graduations, marriages, her own ever-widening family tree. Grandma Thelma stayed humming and telling folk how God come for we. She called my grandpa Mose because everybody knows he knew God. She knew his hands flung her face into Red Sea blues. His voice shook pews. He came for my grandmother. His hands took her tooth. Grandma Thelma told me I bitty finger into. I just know when I couldn't go to school with my fever, I'd awaken safely next to the warmth of her wood stove, and she was healing me. Excuse the noise in the background. I have my dog with me.
It was almost like a tambourine. Whatever the dog is touching, it worked. Mm. Grandma Sarah mourns her only son. The man I was posed to love most ain't live past his crawling, left right after making it out of me, almost like it was a mistake. Every now and then I get to feeling for him. So I go over to the drawer where I keep his things and hold them up to my nose while the iron heats up. My oldest watch, but don't know this too is a crying out. My arm pressing the hot metal into the cotton, warm with the life worked into it by my arm that once held the baby boy barely crawling to his death. I've been beaten, yeah, and I beat back most nights. But Roy Jr. was supposed to grow into a man I could love the right way. And when I get to feeling for him, I let the iron work warmth into his things, press the memory to my body, and sing us both to sleep.
I feel good, Ra. A rose. In a dream, my daddy found his ma hanging one night inside a bedroom closet. She'd been dead 13 years. I was asleep and 9 years old. He said her mouth was a cave opening. Inside there was a choir of deacons dressed and ready for the ritual, a trilling crescendo of sweet songs, nightingales who wanted to be filled by forgiveness, singing, she rose from the dead. Grandma Lizzie cued the choir. They dragged my daddy in that last note. Every bird moaned at once. He gonna be just like you, daddy. I watched turkey vultures gather over my family's field. Why we let nothing die easily?
My mama tells a story of my great aunt Lizzie's funeral, during which she held baby me in her arms, approached the casket to caress the cold cheek of her beloved, and baby me watching all this feeling, baby me knowing my mother as a sculptor, baby me knowing Barbie as portable best friend, said, Mommy, I want to play with the doll too.
If anybody asks you what's the matter with me, when I was 11 years old, my ma dropped me at my daddy's family graveyard and drove away. If I kept worrying, it's where I'd end up, she said. Terrified, I hid from my last name like a purple lizard beneath a magnolia leaf. I crossed the road, marking my distance. I put my hands in my pockets, hummed, running for my life. I didn't want to point. I tried to avoid the engraved D. I tried not to smell my grandma's perfume, mothballs rising from the dirt. I listened to the chickadees around me. Today I drove myself to our family graveyard with my windows slightly ajar. I watched smoke fleeing from my cigar. I'm sliding in no more struggle. I got out. I poured one for my Aunt Angie.
These two poems are, there are two poems in the book, but they were one poem when they were first written. So I'm gonna read them together this now. Co-presence. Ain't gotta talk much to feel. Grief leak up the throat and glue the lips shut sometimes. Sometimes the story tell itself best inside my head. Sometimes ain't no word. Sometimes I be every place but here, and ain't no spell enough to conjure a me into a now. Great great grandmammy Valentine takes me back under, and you gonna have to leave, or at least don't touch. This body ain't mine, just something they made time to dig up. Still got dirt on it that ain't nobody bother to kiss up to God.
Collecting myself. I opened the door and all the girls were gone. No one was peeking into my bathroom stall anymore. No one asked me if I am a boy today. It was just me, sitting on a cold floor, waiting to open my eyes. I imagined their spit was river water shined by moon. I could drink from it. Their laughter bloomed into my bloody noses. I loved all the girls. The closest I got to one of them was in 4th grade, PE, when India aimed the baseball and caught me hard in my eye. She ran over before the teacher could see, and she searched my face for blood. I waited for her to pick me up like I belonged to her.
Wow, that's a poem. Lil Cotton Flower sings themself a song. I play with myself like a doll. I love being this thing that come from out their hands. I am more imagination than blood, prayed into, prayed over, conjured on an embattled bridge between clay and cloth. I was never baby, only doll, pulled out of hands that don't fit together except for in the making of this offering. I play with myself to keep the seams from breaking. I pray to all the real things. Their hands reach toward me, but I feel for something else.
Thresh and hold. Flooding in now, I rest so I can harvest new worlds, a ready net so still. Without rest, I cannot hear my grandma Lizzie and my grandma Thelma. Without rest, I cannot hear my Aunt Carolyn composing for her Lord. I cannot hear my Aunt Angie cussing angels while guiding me across memoried waters. I am learning what real power is. A year ago, I wouldn't have felt our bright red, black, green chords of spirit calling. Women in my family have dropped dead one day, and the family kept right on working. I rest like I have tomorrows, growing on a vine outside. I rest like a horned owl. My ancestors turned into machines by rice is booming in Georgetown, sale extravaganza. I rest beneath my grandma Lizzie's oil-dressed magnolia, painted white and green at the trunk. I risked surrender to her dark sachet. West Africa caught my granddaddy Silas by the brain. Here's a cosmos I picked from his field of grasses. Women in my family have dropped dead one day, purple gowned and waiting for us in the next.
The Black things cry sometimes. See, I ain't never really wanted to die, just disappear for a little while, be without body, without weight, without consequence. Wonder what more there is to specter than scapegoat. What might I feel if free? Is feeling still a Black thing? Am I ever less than the nothing I've been handed? How might I break open the morning in my chest, throw the towel in, give up, resign to the feeling of air against open palm, an imagined caress, lightly kissed, open. That's how I want to touch you, right, in the place you conjure me. Let's swear solemnly to be up in a no good approximation of my worth. No more bids of visibility. Don't see me, I beg. Let me rest in peace. Be still, be silent, be tears muffled in asphalt, be the ground, be beneath you. Walk on over, spit a crude blessing, pour some of yourself out for a dead hoe that looks a little bit like me, but goes by another name. Me dying, me needing to get out this body. Ain't even gotta stop breathing, y'all. Listen, just let this body be apart from me. Something different, maybe my own thing. Do my own thing. Let me feel, for once, free. Will you miss me?
Do you want to do one more or do you want to stop here?
Let's do one more.
Okay.
And yeah, go to questions. I was so in it. I was like,
Me
huh?
too. I mean, I could do this. We could just forget everybody's here. Okay. Will you miss me? Okay. Perhaps I am a fugitive of empathy. Vigilant for so long, I am full. There are centuries of terror crawling just beneath my skin. I no longer consider anyone's noise as my noise. I care for Henrietta Lacks and all the names whispered in my ear by the live oak trees. I don't care about the father of modern gynecology, honored on South Carolina's golf course capital. Memory floods when I walk on grasses because white clovers pushed honey while Black penises fell upon them. I think of which bodies have saved bodies without permission, without mutuality. I think of Black bodies that didn't make it off the bloody table. So I don't die at the hands of myself standing in the shoes of whiteness. I've been dancing with my spirit beneath old cedars. I've been building my imagination by visiting with feral cats. I've been burying my feet in the dirt, staring at magnolia trees and counting waves in the Atlantic. exhausted of singing in an empire's hopeful choir. I've been sitting with my grandmas in their photographs while wafting frankincense and myrrh, and I've been thinking about what Giovanni said to Baldwin in that resurfaced interview on the language of love. If you don't understand yourself, you don't understand anybody else.
And ovulatory or fugitivity at the meeting place of my thighs. What sent her running? All of it. Come together and held in this body, a little too much to carry and keep on with nature as usual. So she followed her own North Star and got gone somewhere. Like Black Moses got her shotgun pressed to the nape of her neck. She leave me here, inspecting all my waters. The moon rises full and new and draws no blood. I scroll myself into a ledger of panic, then set a new course. Bad womb is wound, is handed to me by my mother, is the miracle I birthed myself out of, is my body's refusal, is my invitation away from woman, into beyond, into the Black, into Black, into women. Black women is we, is co-created against time, is the miracle, is the refusal, is the invitation.
Thank you both so much for everything you shared. I don't know that I can speak for anyone else, but certainly for myself, that was a beautiful thing to witness, and thank you both. As a reminder to our attendees, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat or in the specifically in the Q&A box at the bottom or top of your screen, depending on your device. I certainly have some questions for both of these poets. So one of the first questions I have is, when you share your poetry with others, is it different than when you read or perform for yourself? And does that telling change with each sharing?
I think for me, it's each time I read a poem, it may sound a little different because I think I'm just in my body in a different way at different times. But when I'm reading by myself, I find, I think maybe some years ago, I would be much more performative. And I think these days I'm just trying to be very much with how I'm actually feeling and then letting that vessel communicate the poem. So I would say that it sounds the same, but it depends on how I'm feeling. So maybe there's different modes. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, I think it's different because, or like when I'm reading poems to myself as I'm writing and as I'm reflecting or as I'm just returning to them out of need or desire, it feels like I'm more comfortable with the quiet of it. And then when I read them out loud for other people, there are all these voices and influences. And if I'm reading with some, like there are all these other things that enter my brain. Like I grew up like slam adjacent, I'll say, like slam aspiring even. And so sometimes when I perform with some of my like comrades and contemporaries who are like super performative, I find myself wanting to like put more like rise and fall into the poems. And I'm really getting comfortable with the quiet of this book and like learning how to play with the quiet to kind of like what Marlanda was saying, as far as like letting the poems come from my body, how my body's feeling, and like experimenting and playing, but understanding that I can play within the quiet. Like I don't have to like you, loud isn't the only place to play. I guess it's something that I'm learning now, and I'm feeling really grateful to learn.
Yeah, I think there is definitely a lot of emphasis on, being loud and being very present, but there is a presence in quiet and in silence. And I love that you both explore that. I also really loved the conversation between all the pieces that you shared tonight. And there are definitely a couple of themes that you both return to: spirituality and family and loss and longing. How has writing and sharing these pieces changed your relationship with these themes, if it has?
Ooh, that's a great question. You want to go first on that one, Rob?
Right. I feel more aware now. I think that I don't know if my relationship has changed or holistically transformed, but I do think by writing the poems and reading them and following the places they lead me, like even into like friendship and kinship with Marlanda, was like, our books sound like they can. What's going on here? And I think that and those connections help me understand loss, longing, spirituality, and are helping me to kind of catch up to the poems in a way. Like the kind of understanding or the situatedness in the voice in the poems, I think is something I'm still locating in myself. And I think through following the poems and finding community, I'm learning more and becoming more aware and more comfortable in my relationship to those things.
I would say for me, I definitely am more aware than I was before. Like the themes that are present in the book, I wasn't actively trying to write towards any particular theme. These were the themes that were coming up. And I was surprised to have people read my work and reflect back to me, do you see that this is what your work is doing? And I didn't realize that these were things I had been really contemplating within myself that were coming out. And so I feel like when I go, I'm still finding things in the poem. It's almost like they have little things for me to find too. So it doesn't, it sounds strange to say, but it doesn't always feel like I wrote the poems. It feels like there's something larger happening and I'm a part of it. And I think that's why our books, though we didn't know each other while we were writing them, they communicate in such a powerful way. And I think that's tapping into something beyond us. And so, yeah, those themes are present, but it wasn't, like my kid self would be like, today I'm gonna write about this sad thing that happened to me because it's really sad and I'm gonna write about it. Like I would just very clearly say that, and that's what I was gonna do. Where now it's like I'm writing and then things come up and surprise me. And then I get to meet a wonderful person like Rob Malika, and then it's like, oh, that's what that was. Then the connections happen that I'm just, kind of hands off with and just flowing with. Yeah.
Wonderful. We do have a question from Joe. What is your writing process like? It seems that family history and female-centric themes play heavily in your work. Do images and memories move from your own history or history in general? What is the starting point of that process?
I have been thinking recently about the fact that like my book names my direct ancestors, but does not attempt to give like an accounting of their histories. Like it's not like a family history. And I've been thinking even about the fact that a lot of the memories or stories that are playing throughout are things that either came to me or that I was told in moments of emotional distress. So like all the filters of crisis, and how that, I don't want to say the word distorts, but just like colors and shapes and reflects different things, highlights different things in memory. So I think there's a way that some of it is like there's something that feels important for me in my writing process of naming and collecting and harvesting story and harvesting and holding myth for what it could show, like for what, and I don't even be knowing, I'm just like, this just feels important to hold, so I'm gonna hold it. Literally sometimes being in conversations and being like, I need to mark that and just to hold it, and then returning to it, and maybe it's a poem, or maybe it's just something that makes me think deeper. So that's not a complete answer, but that's the part about memories and histories. And I'm like looking back at the question to see if I can pick up anything else. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah, for me, I feel like, yes, so yeah, they do play heavily in my work. I would say that the images and memories start to come because I'm moving in the world. So whether I'm out wandering in the woods or like just walking down the street and see an image. Like the other day I saw, I don't see many kids outside anymore, but I saw a child popping a wheelie, and he held this wheelie for like half of the road. It was an impressive wheelie. And so that image of this kid on this bike very happily showing off this wheelie as the school bus comes by, it sends me to memories of my own childhood. So it's like these moments that I come across if I'm observing or just living my life and paying attention, that I kind of will grab. And when I'm writing, the image might come up, and the next thing I know, I'm remembering some kid in my childhood who did the same kind of movement. And it's a starting point. It's not always, what's the word? That may get completely crossed out of the poem, but it does maybe start as like an origin to some kind of a feeling that's coming up for me. I think my work tends to have a lot of more of an emotional arc. And I think, I'm not sure, but I think that emotional arc is coming out of the images and being able to share the images, and then other people are experiencing the image. That's what I think, but I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. That touched something in my brain. I just relate to that. And I'm also thinking about how gossiping is also an account of, or an engagement with kind of like the histories of like the title is coming from this herbal fact that I found, right? Like the history of enslaved midwives using the root of the cotton plant to cure reproductive ailments as an abortifacient, as to induce labor, and really thinking about that as something that might touch and hold the history my body carries, and then larger histories that feel relevant. And I'm thinking just about like I used to think about reproductive dysfunction, and it was like this terrorizing thing that I felt like I held, or that I felt like my body held, and moving through these poems, through these histories, through, you know, herbal practice, and seeing, sniffing, feeling in the world, into understanding that there are just different ways to be in this body, or there are different modes of relation to this body. I don't know why that felt relevant to say just now, but it wanted to be said. So
No, so I'm glad you said that, because it makes me think, it makes me go back to the question about family history and femme-centric themes, where I'm thinking that sends me to the title Thresh Hold, which originally I thought would be centering rice and the connection between West and Central Africans who were enslaved and were threshing rice. And what does it mean to thresh and to beat something until something falls from it? And then what does it mean to hold what falls? And the more I sat with just that idea and watched, I watched many videos of people threshing rice. And the more I sat with it, it really reminded me of, in a strange way, it sent me to some of the stories I know of the women in my family the things that they have navigated that are somewhat secrets, but at the same time not, because anybody could come by the house and it might be this what we're talking about today, regardless of whether it disturbs you or not. And me kind of catching those moments and trying to not document them and share them as like a documentary, but what does it mean for these, I'm just really interested in what it means for those stories to be told and centered, so that we can see a larger picture. And so I really thought this would be more rice, but it ended up being, the people connected to the people that fed me rice. So yeah.
I love that. We didn't even touched on, like, just you and I in conversation, all the ways that like our books take these kind of like agricultural journeys into story, into body, into longing, all those things. That's deep. Wow. Cousins for real. It's crazy.
Yeah, they're related.
That actually does bring us to a great question that we have from Taylor, who would love for y'all to both speak on the relationship that your poems have to place and how that relationship gets translated into a shareable language. Especially, it seems like your poems grow alongside the nature that grew you, which is beautiful. Thank you both.
Okay, so when I think of for me in particular, I left the South, and while I was outside of the South, I left South Carolina, and while I was outside of South Carolina became, it was like I could see it more clearly. I could see the water, I could see the marsh, I could remember going crabbing, I could remember my feet being nibbled. Like I started to remember all these things that didn't seem important before I left for just a short period of time. And in that short period of time, I came back, and it was as if the place was singing to me, like, look at me. And I was in such turmoil, inner turmoil, that's why the Black-Eyed Susans appear so much. It was almost as if they were the images of Black-Eyed Susans just swaying there like that. And I would see the plantation sign for where my grandparents were sharecroppers, which is a mile from where I grew up. And I'm looking at these Black-Eyed Susans, and they're so beautiful and lively. And I'm looking at this picture of, these ancestors who were sharecroppers, and they don't look as lively, but they're full of life, and they're saying, look at me. So I feel like place jumped inside of me when I left, and I had to get back here. And I spent so much time outside. I mean, as a kid, they would, you inside or outside, pick one, stay outside. But it was more of a punishment to be made to stay outside, where I found myself during this process very connected to place and wanting to, like, if I could drink it and put it in a, in something I could eat, I wanted it in my body. And that's where I am on the answer. I don't know if I answered the question, but I'll stop right there.
Yes. Oh, so good. I was like, I could see the Black-Eyed Susans. I was there, Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you, Taylor, for this question. Thank you for your attention. Also, you're one of my favorite writers.
Yeah.
And I think that when I was wondering about, when I was distilling a manuscript from the poetry that I had been writing over some time, it wasn't even I wasn't super cognizant of it, but it felt like the story to ground myself in was the story of the place that grew me. And I think that I remember thinking kind of later in the process about how I was feeling like there were a lot of narrations of like kind of a return to the South and a confrontation with the ghost of the South. And I remember feeling like thinking about what it meant or felt like to be of those ghosts, to be of that place. and to not feel as much of a confrontation as a enmeshment is the word that's coming to mind. And I think that like recently I've been thinking about how like I am the product of returns, of kind of like counter progress returns. Like on my mama's side, she moved back to Georgia after being the first generation of folks born in New York. On my daddy's side, my grandma moved back to like the country of Henderson County to raise him around his people, which was around the plantation, which was the peach orchard. And so I think that like there's something in my story that I'm still like learning from that is about kind of a return to what you're from, like a return to the soil that grew you. And I've just been thinking about how that doesn't to me feel like I said this already, it doesn't feel like confrontation, but it just feels kind of like if you imagine like your foot is made of soil, and then you put it on the soil, and then your foot and the soil are one thing. So I think there's a way that I'm still learning. Like I think I'm still kind of sensing into what place means and holds for me. And I think there's definitely something about being kind of in and out of Georgia for like the past 11 years of life, just through school, like always returning, never quite making home anywhere else, but always kind of like come go. And I think that the poems profess, and maybe this is like me communicating to my place, to my origins, that I am of that. Like it's like a claiming, or not a claiming, but just like a profession of commitment, of gratitude, of investment, in that place, of acknowledgement that is the place that I'm from. And it literally just shaped the writing process. Like I didn't imagine myself to be just like homesick and writing poems, but I think that was definitely in the room. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. Both of you, both in your poetry and in some of your responses, touch a lot on Black pain. And I would imagine that one of the challenges of writing about that pain is finding the balance of authentically sharing experience, not fetishizing that pain, or continuously exposing yourself to that trauma. And if you are willing, I would love for you to share how you find the balance when it comes to sharing. And if you're not comfortable answering, we certainly can move on to other questions, because I do have others for you.
I don't know. You got something to say, Marlanda?
No, I mean, I guess just that I don't know if that's what I don't know if that's what it's doing, but I want to maybe sit with it a little longer. I don't have an immediate response. I don't. What about you, Rob?
Yeah, I think I'm feeling in the same place of kind of like I was saying about how it doesn't feel like a confrontation. For me, it doesn't feel like this. I've actually thought about the fact that my book does not overtly kind of engage in, or doesn't like speak to or about, none of these things feel worth saying, honestly, not because I'm uncomfortable with the question, but just because I'm like, I don't know what they're worth. Because I don't think that, like, I don't feel that kind of tricky navigation of like pain and survival in these works. It feels like there's like a deeper register of just like the constant ache of life that's not necessarily about Black pain in a particular kind of way. I don't know. It's just.
And I get, and I agree with everything Roger said. It's not an uncomfortable question. I think the work touches on something maybe there's a poem you have, Rob, where you talk about women and the beyond. There's the beyondness that I think these poems are touching that isn't resting in that kind of, that current narrative that's rolling around. Yeah.
Thank you both for sharing. I agree with both of those perspectives, and they are also in some ways universal themes of feeling tired, of missing family, of hurting and longing. So thank you. One of the other, not just themes, but subjects that you both talk a lot about are things like eyes and spit and blood. And I would love to know what it is about those particular bodily parts that is so enthralling to you.
I don't know. There are some things that come out repetitively that like I didn't read some of the poems I didn't read tonight. I used purple a lot, and someone was asking me why is everything purple? And the answer I had for that was that I felt like it crept into my consciousness and into the work because it was my grandmother's favorite color, and she was transitioning while I was working on the book. And my entire life, she would talk about how purple was God's color for royalty. And I think that color began to turn in my mind and come out in different ways. So when I think about eyes and blood and spit, which I don't think spit's in my word, but when I think about eyes and blood, I do think, because I'm constantly thinking about, I think my work's in conversation with like, what does it mean to be a human, a being? And when you're connecting to ancestry, what are the things that connect us? And I think that's why those things come up, because of, DNA and genetic memory and intergenerational memory, all of these, kinds of things. But I don't know that I'm not consciously saying, and now I'm going to use blood, and now I'm going to use, it's not coming out like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think for me, it's like the sensuality of being in a body. And I think paying attention to that for me is very like, Audre Lordian. I feel like that's like, when you first asked the question, I was like, that is the queer and the poetics right there. Like that is what that is. But I do think there's something about, like, one is it's not hyper like conscious, but I do think that the way that I explore the world attunes me to like the felt and experienced and the imagined senses. And also I'm really interested in this work, at least, and probably more work, the body and moving through the body and the experience of being in a body. So
I love that. Here's a I hope much easier question. At what point is a poem finished for you?
It's a great question. I do not know the answer to it. I often feel like, I've heard answers to it. Like I've heard people say, you hear it like a bell ringing off in the air, or, it's like something chiming off and it's just kind of ringing at the end of the poem. But for me, it often feels like I've gotten to some place and I don't know how to go beyond the place I've gotten to. And so the poem is done. But I don't know if that's, and when I say I don't know, I really mean like I don't know, and I'm not really reaching to know either. Like it's just kind of like some of the poems, when I read them even now, I trust that they're finished, but I think they're going to be in conversation with other poems that I'm working on, and they're in conversations with poems that I've written before, and I'm thinking about the same thing continuously. So I'm going to continue, these obsessions, but I don't know that I know. To me, the poems they're just out there, and you say them and they just stay there. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I relate to that. I really like that. Like, it's like I've gotten to a place and I don't know how to get beyond where I've gotten. I think that feels accurate to my process as well. Sometimes I think that I don't spend, like for me, I'm like I hear it, I wrote it, it sounds good, finished. But I think that they're never finished. Like my first answer to the question was never, because I think there will always be a like another rhythm to find, I guess, which is why I'm starting to get really excited about the way you can play when you read. Like a friend of mine, Amani Robinson, I don't think that's the right last name, but Amani was saying something in a performance about like the text as a script from which to improvise, and I like that too, because I do think that yeah, there's so many ways to ride a beat, and I think that that's how I feel in relation to the poems. And then I've heard that some people sit with things a lot longer. Like I don't know, maybe I'll mature as a poet and start like not like holding things closer. But right now I feel very kind of like excited just to let the things live as I hear them, knowing that it's not fixed.
You know what I find so interesting about both of your answers is that they both really focus on the musicality or a musical nature of your poetry, which I think resonates, as Marlanda says. So we are running out of time. Thank you again, both of you, Marlanda and Ra. It was such an honor to speak with you both tonight, and I so appreciate you sharing your time with us.
Yeah, thank you.
As a reminder to all of our attendees, once again, if you would like to purchase either or both of these books, which I encourage you to do, we have links in the chat. On behalf of the Georgia Center for the Book and Read SC, thank you so much for joining us. Until next time, I hope you stay safe and be well.